Hello, guys and gals, me Mudahar, and ladies and gentlemen, what if I told you we have a censorship-free internet? An Internet 2, the sequel to the internet, all before Grand Theft Auto 6 graces our eyeballs, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, apparently this video has been kind of like blown around. Now, this is by a YouTube user known as K0. He wrote, "Developers, I need your help. I made a new internet." Now, this video got like 250,000 views in like the last 3 days, and it's been sent to me, it's been shown around, and it's apparently Betanet. It's the new, fully decentralized, censorship-resistant network intended to replace the public internet. Now, ladies and gentlemen, obviously we all know internet censorship is kind of at an all-time high. I really think, like, I'm not joking, I think in the next 6 to maybe 12 months, we probably will see a vastly different internet, okay? I think a lot of the governments around the world are working with some of the biggest tech companies to absolutely find ways to segregate internet users. You know, whether you're in the United Kingdom and all of a sudden, because of laws, you can't access a whole bunch of websites that shouldn't have been blocked are now actually blocked. Whether you're in the United States and acts like the Screen Act pass, where, you know, accessing most of the internet will require you to use ID verification, and so on and so forth. The internet is going to be a vastly different place. But I don't necessarily think Betanet is the actual answer. So, ladies and gentlemen, to give you an idea over here, this is already a project that has already raised about $54,000, okay, apparently in cryptocurrency over here, which is being used as bounties from my understanding. So you've got 12,000 bucks here, you got 8 grand here, 4 grand here, just to work on different parts of the Betanet system. Now, obviously, I really do think that the people behind this Raven team genuinely want to make a censorship-free internet. Now, this name might remind you of something. I've actually covered Raven stuff before when it came to debloating Windows. But when it comes to debloating Windows, I think I think the scope of difficulty from debloating a Windows installation to making your own fucking internet is a pretty big jump. So they have an entire spec sheet here, Betanet 1.1, which is already like upgraded. And of course, they've got multiple things where they talk about the cryptography, they talk about encoding rules. Basically, this is an overlay onto the internet as it is. So we're going to watch a little bit of like, you know, K0's video just to basically get an idea of what this is.
The user should have a pretty seamless experience using Betanet. You see, the problem is it's up to developers to actually implement this into their stuff. Now, you may be wondering why Betanet works over Tor or anything else. So I like the idea of mutually assured destruction.
So before he goes into mutually assured destruction, a lot of this doesn't require you, the user. You guys really don't have to do anything according to the developers here. Basically, people who are developing and working on the internet have to be the ones to implement the system onto the grand scheme. Now, I think this is a big problem, but I'm going to get to that a little bit later, just because I want to talk about where the internet is now as compared to when I was younger, okay? So what is mutually assured destruction? I'll just simplify it for you. Basically, the idea is if, you know, one big country is beefing with another big country, so think of the United States or China, for instance, we both know these countries are nuclear equipped. They can end the world at a whim. So for instance, if escalation gets to a point where China decides to hit the United States, they will think twice, because once they make that commitment, they know full effect that the Americans will also retaliate with, again, their own line of nuclear weapons. Hence the term mutually assured destruction. And now the idea is you want to make sure that without, you know, if you want to censor the internet, having these overlays or systems is going to be a situation where I guess mutually assured destruction exists between the people on the internet. So you can't just remove things or delete stuff. Let's see how this works in practice here.
We're taking the same philosophy and applying it to anti-censorship. So you see, if you try to take down Betanet, you are going to seriously harm the regular internet in the process. It camouflages itself as regular internet traffic. It's damn near indistinguishable from regular internet traffic. It is carefully designed to be indistinguishable from regular internet traffic. And with the way it's designed, even if they tried to attack Betanet, they would only be harming genuinely actually used things of the regular internet. And even better, there's no single point of failure with Betanet. There is no central point to block or prevent. Even if Raven falls, even if I fall, anything like that, Betanet will still survive because upgrades are voted on. A node's voting power equals its uptime score plus the amount of eCash it has staked. If 67% of that weight says yes, everyone waits 30 days, plenty of time to update, before the changes activate.
So there's a couple things that I have to really talk about here, okay? So in the 4 minutes that, I kind of watched this whole thing, it's not necessarily a super long video. There's more of a push to actually read the implementations yourself. The reality of this is that immediately the concept of voting was something that I really wanted to touch upon a little bit too. So a lot of people also really kind of talked about this too in the comment section. For instance, with the voting system, it sounds like it's going to create problems in the future, risking extreme feuds over changes and creating an environment where clout equals direct influence. The eCash part of the voting power, however, is 100% an issue, as that would likely cause changes to be dictated by a small, higher class user base. Basically, whoever has the most uptime, meaning, I guess technically the most internet nobility, and of course, somebody who also has just more money. You can game the system if it's possibly pay to win. And that's one of the key issues that people have kind of had with this, so far. Now, there are also commenters who say for those that are not developers, this isn't what it makes itself out to be. There's other comments that talk about that, just refer to those. As someone that was initially excited about the idea of this, they do not make it easy for developers to contribute either way. Their terminology is usually wrong or ambiguous, ways for developers to contribute is unclear, and all in all, it shows that the project is a pipe dream. So one guy pretty much says it the way that I've been kind of thinking. Concern one, there's a huge overlap with existing technology. Lots of these core features are already handled by trusted, decentralized overlay networks like I2P, like Tor, NIM, and IPFS. And it's so vague in the documentation that it doesn't tell us why this is a worthy alternative. Concern 2, lack of any prototypes or public code. Concern 3, the team has an iffy track record, and of course AI, and obviously the crypto side of things. Obviously, with cryptocurrency, there is an issue that maybe, just maybe, people can pay to win or game this platform. Now, the thing is, ultimately, what I have kind of a little bit of a concern about, something that makes me kind of wonder, is when they say the words fully decentralized. Obviously, this is not meant to be a replacement to the internet. It's actually something that apparently runs on top of the internet that we know of. Now, obviously, look, Betanet is something that sounds kind of cool, and obviously, I'm sure for a lot of people, they're willing to look at almost anything, and they're trying to say, maybe, just maybe we need something. A lot of this the interest for this comes from, again, people wanting to fight against the censorship that we are currently going through on the internet. And this is where I kind of want to take things beyond just Betanet. Look, the internet does suck, but have you ever kind of considered and sat down and wondered why the internet sucks so hard? Well, I'll answer that question really quickly. Think about all the websites that you go to. I would wager that most of the internet is probably the same 5 or 6 websites at this point, right? If you want to go browse videos on the internet, you probably go to youtube.com and maybe nothing else. That's not to say there aren't other websites out there. There's sites like Rumble, there's sites like Odyssey, there's plenty of video sharing websites, but none of them have the same level of mainstream power as something like YouTube does. You might be wondering, okay, maybe I want to, do microblogging. So you go to Twitter, but there's also Blue Sky. There's other websites. Maybe you want to go to a forum board, but, the only forum or discussion boards that you go to are probably Reddit, because it's a site that makes it super easy to access hundreds of thousands, if not millions of communities at any given moment. So basically the entire internet, as far as I'm looking at right now, most people centralize towards the same 6, 7 big websites in the world. Now, because the internet basically is centralized, in my opinion, into 6 or 7 different websites, what's interesting to note is, of course, obviously Betanet sounds kind of cool, and I would be completely 100% supportive of, having some level of mutually assured destruction, but generally speaking, when it comes to internet censorship, it's really these websites that decide internet censorship for the rest of the world. So I don't know if you remember, years ago, Alex Jones was simultaneously taken off YouTube, Facebook, and iTunes. And that might, not be so mind-blowing nowadays, but obviously when it happened, it showed that a lot of these big corporations kind of just communicated. If they were removed off of one platform, they'd be removed off another one pretty much in unison, depending on how egregious the violations of that person is. Now, of course, there are some exceptions to the rule. I would say Twitter or anything of that nature is probably far more resilient to having, more extremist opinions, I guess you could say. Also, there's other websites now like Rumble that allow you to basically spout whatever you want to say without the intense TOS that YouTube, Facebook, and a lot of these sites provide. But because the internet is so centralized, there's really no incentive from, at least how I can see, that some of these big companies like YouTube or Facebook or Twitter will implement such a technology into their current infrastructure anyways. That is an issue. When it comes to these smaller websites, things are a little bit different in that regard. But when it comes to the big main websites that we go to, obviously they're fine with censoring stuff. They're fine with doing it while communicating with each other as it needs to happen. They don't necessarily need this nuclear weapon on the internet that prevents each other from absolutely, modifying things on the internet. They very much work together when it comes to censorship. And one can argue that alone needs to change. And maybe the answer to that is having a much more federated internet where people are running websites that aren't just these main websites that we constantly keep going to. Now, back in the day, in the early, I would say like the 90s or the 2000s, that Web 1.0 period, there were plenty of different websites, okay? For instance, even in the gaming space, let's say that you were interested with something like System Shock. You could go to a website like systemshock.org, which is an independent, nonprofit fan site. A lot of these sites function off of basically users donating a few bucks every month so they can host the servers that they can run this content off of. And of course, this would be places where, again, you would go to, their forum boards and you would actually download mods for video game or just System Shock 2 related media. For instance, if you wanted to look at Grand Theft Auto, for instance, you could go to one of the most popular boards, GTA forums, right? And this is just me looking at the scope of video games, right? There are search engines like YB that if you just type the word surprise me or click this, you can see websites that somebody has made focusing on entirely cool things, hobbies, passions that will probably take your breath away if you let it, okay? You can look at the Linux System Administrator Guide. You can surprise me with Code of the Ancients. This is the kind of stuff that will probably take hours out of your night if you just choose to browse that part of the internet that's long been forgotten. I mean, it's also something that's been talked about on communities like NoSurf. The internet is like 5 websites now. The sense of exploration is gone. Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, Google, Instagram, TikTok. That's basically it these days. If anyone has ever wondered why the web feels so dull, it's because content is just served to you and there's no reason to go out and explore anymore. There really isn't. Back in the day, using something like Google.com or any search engine meant that you were pilfering through tons of different websites, and they all weren't massive, massive websites to begin with. Now, what Betanet is doing is they want to create a censorship-free internet, right? They want to make it so that, I guess, the internet is not going to be censored. Websites cannot easily be taken down. But the thing is, the internet is one of those things that is technically, I would say, decentralized, but for most people, it will always be centralized in theory. So let's kind of talk about how the internet works. The internet is, I want you to look at it like 3 main pillars. One of those pillars is the hardware, right? So obviously, everyone who's connected to each other, you and me, we are connected via actual hardware. There's a fiber line that comes to my house. It connects to a data center. That data center connects to other data centers. And that data center will usually be connected to a tier 1 network that connects the internet, basically the internet backbone. So basically there are tier 1 networks, the people that run the backbones, the cables underneath the sea, all the agreements for us sharing our data. Big companies like AT&T, the internet service providers, make deals with these companies to basically sell us internet access. The internet allows us to, basically you connect to your internet service provider, and the internet service providers, I want you to look at them as big routers in the world that are basically communicating between each other. So if you're on something like Verizon, and I'm on something like Rogers, because I'm in Canada, I connect to my ISP, you connect to your ISP, we're able to connect because our ISPs talk to each other. That's kind of how the internet works, I guess, maybe from a just like hardware perspective. At a software level, the internet is just a set of technologies that allow computers to communicate with each other. So inside your own house, imagine if you had multiple computers. That computer behind me and this computer that I'm sitting at are connected through a router. And in that router, both of these systems are assigned their own internal IP address. So let's say on this computer, I download Apache's web server and host an actual web page. I can host a forum. I can even host my own version of YouTube and upload all of my videos so I can watch them in my house in a self-hosted fashion. And I could even set up an email server in my house and email every single different computer all across. So that's, again, the internet on a very small internal scale. You know, a lot of places that you go to will have their own intranets where they have their own websites. Places like hotels where they have their own portals that you can access and their own internal communications at times. So that's kind of that second pillar. The third pillar is the agreements between governments and, you know, these big ISPs and the world itself. That is where things are getting attacked. So laws that are being passed in the United States or the United Kingdom allow a lot of these governments to go to these internal or internet service providers and tell them, I want you to remove this website from the internet. Now look, the internet kind of resembles something like out of a cyberpunk future. You ever played a video game where there's like an in-game internet and there's like 5 or 6 different websites and usually everything else is blocked off? That's where I think the internet is slowly but surely headed to. Now, of course, to go back to the ISP, right? If they want to get a website banned, the government can contact the ISP and they can say, hey, you know, this server that exists on the internet, please cut all connections to it, right? You can host a server right now from your home. You can host anything. But the thing is, if all the ISPs agree not to have their users connect to you, then effectively you're completely like taken off the internet. And that's where things like Tor can come in, where obviously, or VPNs, where because of these laws that affect different ISPs differently all over the world, using VPNs or Tor or any of these networks, you can connect to all these sites that you may not be allowed to depending on the legality in your area. And it's crazy to think that's where we're headed to. So the thing about where we're at with the internet now, obviously, if you look at censorship, it's pretty much been a thing in the world. So for instance, if you go to countries like South Korea, can you access adult websites? From my understanding, probably not. Adult websites are generally blocked in South Korea. So how do people get there? They go to VPN services. They tunnel themselves into the United States or other countries where porn generally isn't banned. And those South Koreans can now access adult websites because generally they don't look like they're coming from South Korea. And there's really not much, well, there are things the ISP can do there, but generally speaking, the enforcement is pretty lax. And it does depend on which country you go to. Every country has their own set of laws. You know, there are countries like China, where the people in China are kind of locked into their own internal internet. They are protected by a great firewall that severely inhibits the average Chinese individual from communicating with the rest of the world. That's what internet censorship looks like on a macro scale. And of course, there's places like Iran, where communication, encrypted communication, is often so threatened that the Iranian people ask everyone around the world to set up relays so that they can actually communicate in, relative privacy, so that their governments won't crack down on them. Internet censorship is a real thing. Now, because of certain laws, a lot of platforms have to turn off their actual communications to the United Kingdom. So for instance, the guys over on Linux, on gaming on Linux. Now, this is not an adult website, but according to companies or, platforms like this, they have to say, well, the website is hosted in the US, I am based in the UK, and so it firmly affects us. Plus, we have UK readers too. It's an incredibly wide-reaching law that affects any website with user-generated content, including just plain text like this. There's very clear forums are a target, and that puts me at great personal risk to continue to directly run a forum. So this person is worried because of how the law could impact them as a UK national. So obviously there are other platforms like The Green Living, where again, according to the UK government introducing that act, that forum has to actually be closing down. Because of course, certain platforms can't operate, especially with the extra financial requirements that these unfortunate laws impose. Now, when I go back to Betanet, for instance, right? Betanet is a concept that sounds really, really cool to me. But the thing is, as somebody that's made tons of videos on deep web browsing, I'll tell you right now that what you see with Betanet is something that you can kind of see with other platforms. So for instance, there's something that is known as the Yggdrasil network, which you can use to, again, communicate in a mesh network. So for people that, want to be really off the grid but communicate with their local communities, they can set up or be part of the Yggdrasil network and basically communicate in this self-hosted but still scalable platform. It's like a different version of the internet that you can connect into and operate on websites that are within that network. There's also things like Reticulum, which is a cryptography-based networking stack for building local and wide area networks. So it's not just one network in this case, it's It's a tool for building thousands of networks. Networks without kill switches, surveillance, censorship, control. Networks that can freely interoperate, associate, and dissociate with each other. So again, people are designing internet-like protocols, just different networks that we connect to just to talk to each other. And in some cases, depending on the network, some of these, depending on how they're set up, may even eschew the entire necessity of an ISP, as long as you're only willing to interoperate with the people in these communities. There's also things like IPFS, which again, this is technology that is already implemented by large figures like Lockheed Martin, for instance, where again, they want to decentralize how we deliver content and how we operate the internet on a global scale. For instance, even with them, when Turkey decided to block Wikipedia, they went back to the IPFS network and actually decided to run Wikipedia here so that people could still access, even though the government decided to ban this actual tool from their people. And obviously, I'm sure you guys all know Tor, the deep web, the dark web, the dank web, the place where people can access, hopefully without any form of censorship or government surveillance. Not always in practice, but it serves as another example of a network that we're using to bypass a lot of the control these governments do. And I think that's really all people have. You know, a few days ago, I talked about using PGP and I talked about taking back a little bit of control. And I think Betanet's kind of a cool idea, you know, just as soon as you hear it. But obviously, as somebody that has seen multiple different practicing networks on the internet, there are ways that you can kind of talk to people in a censorship-free zone. But again, like I said, the internet's basically like 7 websites at this point, and it really allows a lot of these platforms to overexert their control. You know, it used to be that going to forums and downloading things, you know, was kind of a fun exploration thing on the internet to do. Now, a lot of that stuff is centralized to Discord. So again, it also raises another issue, right? Imagine if something happens to Discord or those servers are gone. That's a lot of human history and a lot of shit that we've done suddenly poofing overnight. You know, given the fact that there's plenty of places we could have watched videos on back in the day, even if they weren't 4K high quality, now it's mostly just YouTube or Facebook or really any other insert large tech company. Yes, I think if you want to get the internet back, it's not so much that the censorship is kind of there. It's a matter of people looking at other technologies that exist right now, like Tor, like Yggdrasil, like I2P, even though that's really not all that popular, even though a lot of these networks really aren't all that popular. You know, even if you go to Tor, you can access platforms like Dread, for instance, and be part of communities that have bypassed that problem of censorship. You know, the thing is, you can never get rid of the ISP when it comes to the internet. What you can do is use a lot of these sub-networks, like Tor, for instance, and use them in order to bypass the censorship we face. The other thing is, honestly, like if you're somebody that has the chops to want to learn how to do this, consider self-hosting your forums, consider self-hosting a community. You know, even if because of all this, we as a society have to fucking go back to the dark ages, and I don't even consider it the dark ages, just accessing parts of the internet, or just like exploring the internet and looking up micro communities again, instead of just going to Reddit, just going to Twitter, just going to Google, just going to like the same 7 websites. Maybe that's kind of what we need. Okay, maybe that's where the internet needs to be going. But none of these technologies answer what are the biggest questions and problems right now, which are all the crazy laws that are being passed. I'm telling you right now, the internet is headed towards mass segregation. We're going to have a point where because of all of these laws, a lot of websites are going to have to shutter down because they can't cater to every single law that is being propped up in every big country in the world. And with all this ID verification nonsense, I don't even think people should do that. I think if anything, the internet is probably headed to a place where there's going to be this mass surveillance controlled dogshit internet. And there's going to be an entire internet where, you know, much like Tor, people are going to connect into and bypass all of this bullshit to begin with. But yeah, Betanet's interesting. I don't consider it the end-all be-all. There's a lot of stuff that is genuinely confusing to me and plenty of other people that have seen this. But I think Raven's heart is in the right place. We've got censorship-free internet. We've had censorship-free internet. Now it's time for you guys to start learning it and fucking using it. If you really care. If you don't, then dig out your ID, put it to every website, and hope to God nothing comes out of a breach down the road. If you like what you saw, please like, comment, and subscribe. Dislike if you dislike it, I am out.